Title slide reading Being an Immigrant and Disabled in the U.S. Defending Civil Rights Under Escalating Federal Enforcement. Presented in partnership with Access Living, the ARC Minnesota, Disability Rights California, and the Disability and Immigration Task Force of Illinois.
Panel session. As you can see, the recording will be, we will have a recording of the session, but thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. My name is Claudia Castillo, and I'm a PhD student in Disability Studies at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And I'm also a member of the Disability and Immigration Task Force of Illinois. So a big shout out to all my colleagues at this task force. Well, my research focuses on structural barriers and community-led strategies at the intersection of disability and immigration. That's why I am the one moderating this panel. And I previously served as a consul for community, cultural, and political affairs at the Mexican Consulate of Mexico. I'm an immigrant. I have a daughter with a disability, so that's why this topic is particularly important for me, but I know that for my panelists, my co-panelists, is very important as well. I have a few notes today. First of all, we are recording this webinar and we will include it in our debrief email. We will also begin with a moderated panel discussion, and then we will open for audience and these Q&A questions. I also want to give my compliments and thank you to my colleague Chris Ramos, who is in the backstage of this panel, and also thank you to all the people who is supporting this. Chris said in one of the emails that we have, he talked about the importance
Hi,
of.
Claudia, this is Jerome. I'm really sorry. We have an interpreter. Oh, I'm sorry. The interpreter froze. I just want to make sure that we have Kristen up and running. Okay, so we should be good. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Back to you.
No worries. Yeah, so technology, we can have like small blips. But Chris said that he truly believed that this work is very powerful, and we all think about that in this panel. And through this webinar, these are his words, we are demonstrating how to other organizations that our commitment to justice is shared with immigrant communities and many other justice movements. We cannot continue to operate in silos that speak only to disability needs when there are so many of us who live at the intersection of multiple identities or multiple forms of marginalization. So, with that in mind, I would like to also note a few tech and access notes. Card captioning is available, ASL interpretation is provided, and Spanish interpretation is available as well. So if you would like Spanish interpretation, please select, there's a globe icon labeled interpretation, and you have to choose Spanish and then mute the original audio. Also, attendee chat is read only today. We will use chat to share links and short image descriptions for accessibility. And then please use the Q&A button to ask questions. So we will start right now. I will also like to offer a special thank you to Alianza Americas.
On screen is the Alianza Americas logo, stylized, flag-like shapes in red, orange, and gold representing North and South America, alongside the organization name in large, bold letters.
Alianza Americas is our coalition partner, and they are supporting Spanish interpretation today. They are also part of the task force and do amazing work. Alianza Americas was founded in 2004. It's a transnational network of immigrant-led organizations. Their mission is to build an inclusive, equitable, and sustainable way of life for migrant communities by empowering community leaders, government agencies, labor organizers, and faith-based communities to work for dignity and justice for all people in the Americas. Now, I am going to introduce our panelists, and then we will begin the discussion. So I'm going to start with Mia Ives Rupli.
A headshot of Mia Ives Rublee appears on screen, wearing a red blazer and white shirt, smiling warmly against a light blue background.
Mia is currently the director of the Disability Justice Initiative at the Center for American Progress and speaks both nationally and internationally on disability and civil rights. She obtained her MSW from UNC Chapel Hill, and she previously worked as a vocational counselor, researcher, organizer, and advisor. Next is Richard Diaz.
A headshot of Richard Diaz appears on screen, wearing a dark suit and black tie, smiling against a light gray background.
Richard is a senior attorney with the investigations unit at Disability Rights California. He is part of a statewide team that investigates abuse and neglect of people with disabilities. A major part of his work focuses on monitoring conditions of confinement in California's adult and children immigration detention facilities. His advocacy includes administrative complaints, investigations and representation, legislative advocacy, and public reports. Also, I'm going to introduce my dear friend Michelle Garcia.
A headshot of Michelle Garcia appears on screen, with red hair, seated in a power chair, wearing a purple top, smiling outdoors.
Michelle is the manager of organizing and community development for Access Living of Metropolitan Chicago. She builds disability leadership in Latinx and immigrant communities and advances disability justice at the intersection of immigration and healthcare through education and partnerships. She helped launch the National Coalition for Latinx with Disabilities and supported the creation of the Disability and Immigration Task Force of Illinois. Then I'm going to present my Thor.
A headshot of My Thor appears on screen, with long dark hair with pink highlights, wearing white earrings and a red top, photographed against a white background.
Mai is Chief Program Officer at the ARC, Minnesota, where she helps promote and protect the rights of people with developmental disabilities. Mai has extensive experience in disability rights and public policy and was a Bush Fellow focused on the intersection of race and disability. She is also a founding member of Amplify MN, a disability justice collective. She identifies as a disabled Hmong woman. Paula Sandoval.
A headshot of Paula Sandoval appears on screen, with long dark hair, wearing a black blazer and gold necklace, smiling against a dark gray background.
Is supervising investigator at Disability Rights California. She joined DRC in 2017 and the investigations unit in 2022. She conducts complex in-field investigations, inspects facilities, reviews records, and develops findings and recommendations related to rights violations affecting people with disabilities. So as you can see, my panelists are hands-on in the work. They are all from different parts of the country, and I think they will all share with us very, very valuable information. So I'm going to start with the first question. When we planned this, we had tons of questions, but we will try to keep it narrow just to my panelists. Remember that we only have like 2 minutes in order to cover all the topics that we discussed. And then I'm going to start with rooting by ourselves in community. So, Michelle and Mai, how has increased federal enforcement of immigration laws affected the daily lives and civil rights of immigrants with disabilities?
So the way we have seen that federal enforcement has impacted the daily lives of immigrants with disabilities and has violated their civil rights, we have seen this in various ways, right? We have seen it like it has impacted their mental health, physical health, and emotional being and social well-being as well. And I say this because immigrants with disabilities no longer feel safe at home as they fear ICE coming in through their door and that they'll be taken from their family as well as their caregivers being taken away from them, whom they depend on so that they can live a day-to-day activities or do their day-to-day activities. They also fear, leaving here, the country that they've known mainly for years or since birth, because they know that if they go to another country which would be their maybe country of origin, they would not have the adequate medical resources that they need to survive. And many of them too fear going to their medical appointments or getting the resources they need because they fear that, like I mentioned before, ICE will be there and they will be detained, and they will not have the resources or adequate supports that they require. And then obviously all of this has compounded and also fearing and going and socializing. We have seen time and time again, people are just wanting to stay at home, and this takes a toll on their mental well-being, and it becomes to the point where they become more disabled because depression kicks in. And so this really shortens their sort of family and friends, a circle of support because of that. So definitely we have seen how much the federal enforcement has impacted our folks. Thank you.
My.
Yeah, thank you, Claudia and Michelle. So this is my, I think everything Michelle just mentioned is also many of the things that, we're experiencing in Minnesota when ICE was occupying our communities. Still occupying. So yeah, we were, we were afraid, we were confused, felt, powerless. But I guess the one thing that I would also highlight is, I've heard of many, experiences from disabled immigrants. And, one of the things that they really were afraid of was just like, how do we communicate, right, with ICE agents if we happen to encounter them, because we all know that disabled folks, communicate differently. We move differently through this world. We speak differently. Our forms of communication are often seen as non-compliance, right? When really it's not. It's due to our disabilities, and so that was a big fear for a lot of folks, as far as like, if you're, deaf and you need ASL and you're encountering an ICE agent, what do you do, right? I know for myself as immigrant, disabled immigrant, using it, as a wheelchair user, like I often thought about like, what would I do, if I encountered somebody, and I, obviously am at a disadvantage, and so the communication part was really key for us, because we know that law enforcement, in general, is just not good as far as, handling situations involving people with disabilities. But when you have mobility issues, or you have communications issues, or all those kinds of things due to your disability, it makes it even more challenging, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And as you shared, there are many aspects in our daily lives that we do not think will be affected, and they turn to be affected. And in this sense, I would like to also ask Paula to share a little bit on this same question about how this increased federal enforcement of immigration laws has affected the daily lives of people with disabilities.
Hi, everybody. This is Paula, pronoun she, her. I agree with my fellow panelists, because people with disabilities that are immigrants are just living day to day with this fear, and that dictates the choices that they make. Based on my observations, I've seen people change or decide whether to send their children to school or go to certain appointments. They have an additional burden to coordinate with their community on getting groceries, getting access to their medication, like going to the pharmacy to pick up their medication. So there's just like an additional responsibility to be cautious and try to be safe for themselves and their community. And it's just an additional layer of things to consider and planning. and having to be interdependent with your community and your family and your friends. So it impacts people every single day, and I feel like all areas of life. But I agree with everything else that my fellow panelists said.
Thank you very much to all of us, to all of you. So continuing, now that we grounded how this affects people in daily lives, I would like to ask Mia and Richard, what legal protections exist for immigrants with disabilities, and how can individuals effectively assert their rights in the current climate?
Thank you so much. This is Mia Ives Rubley. I am an Asian American woman with short black hair, and in the background is a window. So, we've been studying and looking at sort of what are the exact protections that are available to migrants and immigrants, particularly those without documentation. And one of the things that we thought should be really emphasized is that both the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Rehab Act both protect individuals who are non-citizens as long as they are on US soil. So we really want to emphasize that individuals are able to still receive those protections, even if they don't have documentation of citizenship in the United States. Now, what does that mean? That means that, particularly for the Rehab Act, it means that any program that is funded by the federal government or receives any funding from the federal government is required to not discriminate against people with disabilities. It requires a specific, it requires them to think about specific accommodations for those individuals, and ensuring those individuals aren't treated any differently. And so, we've seen a lot of abuses happen by programs that are funded by the federal government, and individuals who have been harmed due to their disability may be able to file complaints under the Rehab Act or under the ADA law. In terms of other protections that individuals may have, when we're talking about language access, which is a huge issue for individuals who are deaf or need access to be able to communicate through a communication board, all of this is actually protected under the Constitution, Title VI of the Civil and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which states that you have equal protection under the law and access to language. So those are two, if you're an individual that does not have access to an accessible language for yourself, you may be able to utilize those to the law and the Constitution to help protect your rights and be able to access ASL interpreters, plain language, and a communication board. The last thing that I want to say is that there's the Flores Settlement Agreement, which is a binding legal agreement that established national standards for detention, treatment, and release of minors from detention without necessary delay. That goes along with the Olmstead decision that was done, that can help disabled children and disabled adults get out of detention centers with all haste. Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you, Mia. Richard, can you please pop in and continue the conversation with this question?
Sure. Hello, my name is Richard Diaz. he, him pronouns, and I am a Latino male with short dark hair, black rimmed glasses, and my background is blurred gray. I'm wearing a gray shirt. I think Mia did an excellent job explaining, what the legal protections. The only thing I'll add is that there are the states also have certain laws that sometimes mirror some of the ADA protections. So depending on the state you're in, you may also have additional protections that has laws that have been passed in your state that can protect you as well. So again, it would depend on what state you're living in.
Thank you very much. So now that we have grounded what actual legal protections there are, Paula and Richard, we have the Constitution, we have state laws, we have the ADA, we have everything that we have mentioned, and we have all these protections on paper. But how, and ICE also has policies that describe accommodation for detainees with disabilities. However, in your experience, where do these protections most often fail in practice, or whether in encounters, processing, detention, or deportation? And what does harm look like in the first 24 to 72 hours? Richard, we can start with you and then go with Paula.
Great, sounds good. Yeah, thank you. And I think in our experience, since we do a lot of the monitoring of detention facilities, one of the first places that, what we see this kind of process, these protections break down right away, really, because people are, arrested and then they are taken to some of these large detention facilities. But even in their initial intakes, not, the identification of their needs and their disabilities isn't really happening. So oftentimes people are not getting the correct medications that they need, or bridging of medications that they were taking outside or at a different facility. And then they're not being provided with the proper accommodations or devices that they may need in order to just like live their daily life in the facility. So I would say these protections break down right away. And yes, all these facilities and these agencies, they have their own internal guidelines. There's guidelines for detention standards as well. But again, we've time and time again see that they're failing these. They're not meeting their own requirements even, and on top of the requirements of like the Section 504 of the Rehab Act. So I would say that things are breaking down right away, unfortunately, and then it's affecting people's health, medical health, mental health, and has a very lasting effect. And I'll pass it to Paula.
Hello again, this is Paula, pronouns she, her. I didn't describe myself earlier. I'm a Latina with brown skin, dark hair pulled back, and I'm wearing a red cardigan with a collar. And I am also with Disability Rights California and do these inspections of facilities along with Richard. And I agree that people don't have access to the accommodations or the medical needs that they have, and it's due to the facilities and agencies not being equipped, prepared to serve, work with, interact with people with disabilities. So different accommodations are things that people need, but if they don't have the equipment, the staffing, the understanding on how to work with people and support them, they don't. So we're observing that spaces are not clean, the environment is harmful for people with disabilities, there's a delay in giving them medication, and having like a psychologist or like a mental health professional go out and speak with someone in a crisis. For example, if people are having suicidal thoughts or behaviors, instead of providing support, they're put in isolation. So it's that those are the problems that we get to observe, is that the facilities had an abrupt surge of people being admitted, and the facilities are not equipped to follow their own policies or practices. So it's dangerous for people with disabilities.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also agree that the first hours could be really critical. I mean, the whole process could have a lot of deficits, and the lack of accommodations can be streamed in all throughout the process. I would like to continue with let's talk about cases and accountability a little bit. So, Paula and Richard, continuing on the conversation, in the reported case of Anthony Paredes, who was a deaf 18-year-old tackled by ACE agents during a protest in LA, later reported being denied access to a sign language interpreter while in custody, what should have happened under the ADA or Section 504, and what accountability pathways are realistically available in this type of cases? And before we continue, I'm going to follow your lead and I'm going to describe myself. I'm a Latina woman wearing a black sweater, long hair, and you cannot see it, but there's a cat in the back in case you hear her. So, Paula.
Thank you, Claudia.
A photo appears on screen from the Los Angeles Daily News, showing a group of community advocates gathered at a rally. In the foreground, a young man, Anthony Paredes, holds a handwritten sign reading, "They tried to bury us, they didn't know we were seeds." The photo relates to a story about Paredes, a deaf Los Angeles teenager who says immigration officers assaulted him after he could not hear their commands.
When someone is protesting, if you have a disability or not, folks have the same rights. You have rights when you're interacting with law enforcement, but the reality is that even though you have your rights and you're putting them in practice, that does not usually mean that the police or the government will respect your rights. However, putting them in practice could help you in the future, with your case. So it's good to still know what your rights are. If you're a person that is deaf and hard of hearing or are nonverbal, we have to recognize that it puts you in a more vulnerable position because you're limited in the way that you can interact with the police or the government official. A tool that we came up with is an accommodations card that you can carry with you if you choose to communicate or let the police officer know that you have a need for an accommodation. We can share the link to our website where you can access that accommodation card that you can use. But we just wanted to talk about the truth, that it's difficult, to protect your rights or protect your safety when you're having interactions because of all the examples that we see. Richard, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. And this is Richard again speaking. And I'll just add to that. Yeah, the law enforcement, they have they're required to provide interpretation. They are required to provide effective communication when a situation is identified that they need to. So they are affirmatively required to act as well. But again, like I think how Paula was mentioning, that's not always the case, and especially what we've been hearing in the news and everything right now. But there are guidelines even that the DOJ of the Department of Justice has for law enforcement in order to follow when they are encountering a person who is deaf or hard of hearing. So they are required to make inquiries, try to start the communication, whether it's written or in other forms, and then once they identify that they need an interpreter in order to effectively communicate, then they're required to try and get one in order to have those communications. So that sounds like what was breaking down in this situation, that they didn't get to that. They didn't affirmatively do that and get those services for this person, which they are required to do. But unfortunately, if they don't do it, you don't have a way to resolve that right away until sometimes afterwards. And that's kind of just the reality right now.
And I'm really happy that you both mentioned resources. And Paula, thank you very much for sharing about the Know Your Rights cards that you have. Access Living and the Disability and Immigration Task Force of Illinois also developed cards, Know Your Right cards for people with disabilities, because this is not only for people who is hard of hearing or deaf. There's a lot of people with intellectual disabilities or other disabilities that might need special accommodations or just a way to communicate and know their rights in hand or in written and in different languages. So I think
Claudia,
yes.
this is Paula. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I'll add that types of accommodations people can ask for can be that you need them to contact one of your family members. That can be a type of accommodation. There's also things that I've observed is people are not familiar with the specialists that they see. They don't know what types of medications they take. So I know all of that is part of like emergency preparedness, which is something that we should also encourage people to do. But in a lot of like cultures, we rely on like our adult child or like our spouse to have all this information for us or our loved ones. So just trying to keep that in mind, that those are unique accommodations people can ask for on top of all the other assistive technology or other, like behavioral plans, the other typical traditional things. So thank you for reminding me of that.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for popping and for saying that. We will also share all the resources that we have in the debrief email that you will all get after we finish this panel discussion, because we also collaborate with many organizations, for example, Hands United, that also has many resources for people who is deaf or hard of hearing. Continuing with the tensions and how this has been evolving in this past year, I want to ask Mai, since we all felt the experience of Aliyah Rahman yelling, "I'm disabled," as ICE officials forcibly detain her, what did this moment activate in your perspective? Did coalition strengthen? What did you learn about what works and what doesn't when public attention spikes? I mean, now in the era of social media and everything goes viral.
Yeah, this is Mai again, and I apologize I did not describe myself earlier either. I'm an Asian woman, um, and I'm wearing pink rimmed glasses, uh, kind of darkish hair, but maybe light too, and a dark red top. So, um, yeah, and so I guess to your question, Claudia, I think it activated what Minnesotans are all too familiar with, which is that, when Black and Brown folks are confronted by law enforcement, human rights are adversely violated compared to those of white folks, right? And when you add disability on top of that, obviously you are compounding other challenges such as access and accommodations. And I'm sure most everybody with us today remembers, one of the last phrases that George Floyd mentioned before he was killed, which was, "I can't breathe." And I'm thinking of, when
A photo from The Guardian appears on screen, showing Aliyah Rahman, a disabled Bangladeshi American woman with autism and a traumatic brain injury, being escorted out of the House chamber by Capitol Police during President Trump's State of the Union address on February 24, 2026. Rahman, a guest of Representative Ilhan Omar, had silently stood up during a portion of the speech and was arrested despite alerting officers to her injured shoulders. She had previously been forcibly detained by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis while on her way to a doctor's appointment.
Aliyah yelled out, "I'm disabled," when she was being detained, it just brings back that memory of the unrest that happened after George Floyd was killed. And I think that just kind of encapsulated for us in Minnesota just exactly how broken our justice system is. But I do want to point out that when Renee Good and Alex Preddy were killed in Minnesota by ICE in broad daylight, some of that narrative changed for us, right? Because now, we understand that obviously race has a big factor to play in it. Disability has a big factor to play in it. But when you have, two white able-bodied folks who were also involved in the occupation with ICE in Minnesota, I feel like, now it's risen to a different level because now our entire community, it is a target. And so I think it just reinforces the fact that as a community, no matter what your background is, what your ability level is, we need to come together. We need to protect one another and look out for one another. And I think that put attention on the situation that we're experiencing right now in a different perspective, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And how that experience of coming together also reflected in other cities and in other states. I think when we see an example of resistance and actually defending people, it replicates. So that's why it's important to keep raising our voices. Going back a little bit into protections and legal protections, Mia and Richard, let's name a little bit of the accountability chain. I mean, we know that we
Yeah.
have legal protections, but who is supposed to ensure the compliance of Section 504 of the ADA and the ADA? What checks have weakened? How has instability in DHS oversight offices affected people's ability to report and remedy harms? Mia, thank you.
Yeah, we're getting into some complex territory here. Both the Rehab Act and the ADA require a lot of proactive work by disabled people in order to report things that are happening. So, we do have, as others have stated, we do have a couple of disability rights groups that are going in, checking on some of the detention centers. Often that requires multiple complaints already to be filed before they go in. So a lot of it starts from somebody has already been injured, somebody has already seen their rights being invaded or broken. And so that's the starting place of where we often see it. Now, depending on sort of where that individual receives or experiences their rights being impacted will depend on sort of where you go. We have seen that a lot of the ICE, Border Patrol, CBP things, those complaints would normally go towards DHS. Unfortunately, in March of last year, the administration fired nearly all the staff in the three offices that really do a lot of the investigation of human rights abuses. And those offices include the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties within DHS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Omnibus Office, and the Office of the Immigration Detention Omnibus. So already they have sort of torn down some of those mechanisms, made it much harder, and created significant delays in being able to address some of the issues that people are facing. The one thing that I want to point out is that under the ADA, you do not have a right to do private suits. And so you have to submit a complaint and then hope that the organization that receives those complaints, or the division or department that receives those complaints, sees a pattern of issues and decides to go after whoever has basically broken ADA law. For the Rehab Act, that is a little different, which is why you often see the Rehab Act used more often, is that you do have a right to private action. And so you can submit a complaint to either DHS or DOJ, depending on who has broken the law and broken your rights. And then you do have another right to be able to actually do lawsuits against these folks. Some of the organizations that are helping with these lawsuits include places like ACLU, and then the state's disability rights organizations. Each state basically has a disability rights organization that you can contact. Unfortunately, a lot of them are pretty underwater, but that's probably the best place to start in terms of some type of complaint and lawsuit around that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mia. Richard, do you want to continue answering, please?
Yeah, I think just to add is that Disability Rights California is one of those protection and advocacy orgs that Mia just mentioned. So we are like the disability rights like watchdog for California. And as she mentioned, there's one of our type of organization in all of the states. So our orgs are a good place to start, I think, for sure. If you are, you have having issues, or you've had in the past some sort of a discrimination issue, to relay your complaint. But I agree with everything she said in terms of how the structures that were in place to do some oversight internally, at least in the federal government, have completely been gutted. So it is now reliant a lot on individuals and orgs to do the oversight through lawsuits or other pressures that they can put on either elected officials or other folks. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we are going to talk a little bit of community efforts and how this has translated into the community arena. So Michelle and Mai, let's talk about community efforts on the ground and what tactics have you seen actually change outcomes? And what role do advocacy organizations play amid changing federal priorities? In your role as community organizers and your experience, what do you see in that field? Michelle.
Yes. So again, I failed to describe myself earlier. Sorry. I'm a Latina woman who is sitting in a wheelchair. I have dark hair put in a ponytail, and I'm wearing a pink floral dress. And that's to the extent of my description. And in terms of what we have seen in the community, what has worked, obviously from the first administration, as they've been calling it, Trump point one to Trump point two, 2.0 or whatnot, what we had seen and what we've been seeing that has been working is community education about know your rights. We did, the Disability Task Force of Illinois, along with Access Living, we have been doing know your rights workshops specifically for immigrants with disabilities. And when I say specifically, it's because the immigrant-led organizations have been doing know your rights trainings and train the trainers and all of this. And they do focus a lot on the immigration part. Yes, it's important, But when it comes to the disability arena as well, we also had to include like what are their rights as a person with a disability, because again, the intersection between those two communities, right? So we added that component and we've been doing that. So I think it's very unique to the work that we have been doing on the ground to educate our partners in coalition around this, but also the community about their rights of immigrants with disabilities. So we have seen an uptick, a positive uptick of people knowing their rights because of the work that we have put forth. People having their know your rights cards and being able to say, I am a person who's deaf, I need an interpreter, a person who has a mobility impairment, I need my wheelchair with me, so on and so forth. And so that's the efforts we have seen on the ground and that have been successful, you know, and then people feel safer once they know that they have rights as immigrants with disabilities. Because the first thing when people come into these trainings that we've been giving is that I didn't even know I had rights as an immigrant with a disability. So that's where we're like, oh, well, you do, and these are it. And then also providing community resources, given all of the fear that we were talking about earlier, people have built a really tight-knit community of support, I feel. Do we still need to strengthen it? Of course, but people have, you know, been there for each other when, you know, we don't want to go out because we fear ICE being there. So people have been able to, you know, support each other on, I need food deliveries, I need medication deliveries. So those resources available, like we've been discussing, is a huge support system of support. Home care has been another huge issue that we've been discussing that needs a circle of support. Do we need to work on it? Of course, but nonetheless, people have been stepping up to support those who need home care in the midst of ICE coming in and taking away the care that they so much depend on. Like I mentioned earlier, of people, you know, depending on their caregivers, and their caregivers have been taken away or detained by ICE. So I think that's what we have seen on the ground. And do we, of course, need to continue working on it? Yes. I think that we've been trying to work on and how to kind of like get it to move is the rapid response for people with disabilities. I know we were having a conversation specifically with Mia around how does this work? Because obviously people with disabilities, it's a little bit more complex to do rapid response. We do need the support of our allies to do the rapid response work. So we're doing that in support of our community. Definitely needs a huge circle of support. So I'll leave it at that. If you wanna say more, or Paula, I don't know.
Yeah, this is my yeah, I mean, I guess I can just, you know, echo everything Michelle just said, because what's happening in Illinois is also happening in Minnesota, and I'm super proud of the way our community has come together to support one another, to protect one another, and keep each other safe. Creating mutual aid and you know, caregiving, all that sort of stuff. You know, at the ARC Minnesota, our focus is on folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, right? And they're at the heart of who we are, and so we've been engaging all our self advocates across the state on, you know, providing information and know your rights information as well, and making sure that folks understand, you know, what's happening in the community and how they can be involved as well. But I would also just to you know, point out something else in addition to all the things Michelle said is for that whole concept of rapid response, right? That takes money, right? And right now, our communities are hurting and they need essentials. And in order for our community to really be effective and to help make this movement, if you will, sustainable, grant makers and foundations, I know, are pivoting and trying to rise up to the occasion right now and provide that rapid response funding. So I would say that a big part of what the community needs to do also is to let our folks who provide grants and other kinds of resources to just not do that in response in a reactive way, but in a proactive way, right? Because you never know what's going to happen in your community when something is needed to help your community to access the things that they need just to live their daily lives, right? And so it's really important to have a budget set aside to address that. And we're seeing that happen right now with some foundations that we work with and grant makers that we work with. But it really needs to be folded into the work that everybody does, because those resources are really important, and access to those resources are really important as well.
How important is that you talk about money? And sometimes we say, like, we do a lot of networking, a lot of sharing information, but actually setting aside resources for helping the community is key. And going back a little bit on what the Disability and Immigration Task Force of Illinois does, I think one of the things that also have worked is how we talk to other allies that are not necessarily in the intersection of disability and immigration, but once we raise the voice and get the word out on what we do, it becomes evident that it touches all of us. So thank you very much, Michelle and Mai. Paula, I'm not sure if you want to get a word, and yes, and answer the question as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, folks. This is Paula again. I just wanted to also share that a lot of the changes and positive outcomes that I've seen have come from the community that cares, just coming together and forming groups that do, for example, visitation. Some of them organize and go look at the rules of the facility and do a schedule, and they go visit individuals that are detained that don't have any family close by because they were brought in from a different state. And that's how they're able to uncover their needs, like on their disability needs, lack of accommodations, and then get them connected to attorneys or other organizations that can go out and help. I've seen them pull funds together to add money to the commissaries. We know that it's so expensive to get Tylenol, to get basic needs that they need, like water bottles, or just other basic necessities that the facility is not providing them. I've also seen them urgently get in contact with community organizers or nonprofits when someone is ready, for example, to have a bond, but they need someone to like finance the bond because they don't have anybody else. And yet these community organizers, these community groups go and find people, recruit funds and stuff and fulfill those needs. So I just wanted to share that, that looking towards your own community, like we're all interdependent of each other in one way or another. I've also heard workers, right, people with disabilities that hire caregivers that may be immigrants, have different mixed status, they're creating plans to create like an emergency plan in case someone is detained, figuring out how to pay them time off if they need to. So just wanted to give credit, like that community is very strong. And this whole conversation about like the coalitions being inclusive of other people from other movements is super important. So just wanted to highlight some of those great efforts that people are getting together and doing. So thank you.
Yeah, the community is strong. So thank you very much for adding that. So now, We are going to talk about policy, and we're going to discuss also some closing commitments, and then we are going to open the panel for questions from the audience. Mia, we are going to need every stakeholder that we can get to be an ally of us. So how we get elected allies, what are the most strategic policy moves, or how do we shift this ability to public policy, to an effective public policy?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think one of the things that I've found extremely helpful, and this is something that we do in the repro area as well, is to make really good allies of other organizations that focus on the subject area that we're working in. And so what oftentimes happens is that we connect with other immigration groups and provide sort of a background on how these policies and issues are affecting disabled people, because it's much harder to get certain things out and across and sort of normalized without those partners. So our first step has always been to go to where the communities are, go to where the organizations are, and communicate with them to build up a coalition of people to push for specific policies, et cetera. The next thing that I would say in terms of the things that we should be looking at, I think what we need to do is actually look at the many ways that we could utilize the ADA and the Rehab Act in more creative ways to help protect more individuals within the immigration system. And so what I mean by that is that we know that we are testing the Umstead decision to utilize to try and get individuals with disabilities out of detention centers. And there have been some conflicting decisions in the courts on whether that works or not. But we believe that that is on sound ground legally to utilize to try and get individuals out of detention centers. And that's also backed up with the Flores decision that helps get youth out of detention centers as well. So just, we would like to see a couple of things happen. One is that eventually, if there is a more friendly administration, we would like the DOJ to put out basically a FAQ that would state that non-citizens are protected under the ADA and the Rehab Act. That is one thing we would really like the DOJ to put out. And I know that sounds like a small thing, but it's something that we believe would help sort of flag to other lawyers and courts that these protections are there and that they should be utilized not just for US citizens, but also for non-citizens and undocumented folks. We also have seen a lot of state work being done to try and provide services and protections for undocumented folks. And I really encourage folks who are working in your states to ensure you coordinate with the immigration groups in those states to ensure that whatever they are working on is inclusive of disabled people and their needs and issues. I think I saw in the chat, in the webinar chat, about questions about medical equipment. And that is a very important issue that we have seen time and time again, having people lose, or having people medical equipment basically stolen off of people, which has caused significant health issues for these individuals. There was a story about somebody who had an amputation. He was a DACA recipient, and they took his prosthesis away. And even after he left the detention center, they did not return that device back to him. We also saw a deaf boy who had a cochlear implant, and they refused to give the family back that device so the kid could hear once the kid got out of detention center. So these are real significant problems. And we see this also in by police as well. So this is a cross board issue, and is one of the issues that I think we really, really need to address as soon as we can, to ensure that people have right to access of their medical equipment.
Thank you very much, Mia. And I think what you said, it's not a small thing that the DOJ puts actually in visible that non-citizens are also protected. We have talked a lot how there's a little bit of disconnection between disability rights lawyers and immigration attorneys, and how making this visible could be really helpful in that conversation in the intersection. And I totally agree with you how the lack of medical equipment and other lack of accommodations and actually protecting and respecting people's rights could represent or could be translated into impairments, or how actually immigration policies and practices can disable and further create impairments in people. So this is a heavy conversation, and I want to close before we go to the questions from the audience. I want to ask all of you for two goals. One, it's a short-term commitment in disability and immigration serving, how disability and immigration serving organizations can make together, what can we do together to reduce harm immediately, and one long-term commitment. So in an ideal world, if you have a magic one, what would be like the short-term commitment and the long-term commitment for organizations? Anyone can start.
This is Michelle. I can start. And once an organizer, always explain as an organizer how you can start by having a simple conversation, a one-on-one, as we call it in the organizing world, with your state or with your local or state immigration or disability organization. If you're not already, get to know one another so that you can work together. Again, we work at this intersection. And so it's very critical that we know what each other is working on. It's been mentioned by panelists that, we should be working together and knowing what each other is working on so that we can connect. So having that one-on-one is critical. Then after you have that one-on-one, support each other's work. Remember that these two communities, the disability community and the immigrant community, are very underserved communities. And so we need each other to uplift our voices. Let's get in the streets and uplift our voices, or however you want to uplift the voices. But, we need each other. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Michelle. Who wants to go next? Richard?
Sure. Echoing a little bit of what Michelle was saying, I think like short term, just definitely like redoubling efforts to collaborate with orgs that are if you're a disability rights org, that means collaborating with immigration advocacy orgs. I think making also clear, what role you can play and what information you have would be, really beneficial. And then trying to get that from your, the counterparts as well, because there's definitely places where we can help each other, I think a lot. And I've found that over the years that it's been great collaborations and we've made some, really positive impacts. And then I would say long term, a long-term goal, I would say for organizations like disability rights organizations, just to make this work a priority, the work at the intersection of immigration and disability, I think it hasn't necessarily always been a priority in our circles. So making it a priority, trying to fund it as just like you would fund any other work being done at the organization, and knowing that this issue it's not just a right now issue, and it wasn't just an issue that appeared during the first Trump administration. I think, these immigration disability issues have been around for a while, and they will continue to be around, after 2-3 years from now. So we need to keep working together and hopefully making a difference.
It's definitely because the intersection will keep existing. Paula, Mia, or Mai, any of you would like to add your short-term and long-term commitment?
Hi, this is Paula. I'll go. Short term, I'll say that it's important to continue to elevate the experiences and the opinions of the people impacted. So using my role as a professional to still be in the spaces with people that are impacted and ensuring that they're in the table when important collaborations are being built, coalitions are being built, movements, propositions. Um, if we're in an immigration organizing space, bringing in people with disabilities and vice versa, like being inclusive. And then long term is being true and firm in the values that we hold when we're confronting or opposing like an attack for our community, we staying true to like the values that brought us to this movement and not excluding a specific population, for example, if it makes it easier to pass like our goal, because then that's when we start like dividing up and like not having solidarity. So just staying true to those values of like a coalition and building movement with others, and applying that to all of our work, all of our traditional work. So I hope that makes sense of like a short term and a long term. Thank you.
Hey, this is Mia. I'll go next. I think for the short term, for me at least, I hope to continue to uplift stories of disabled people that are within dealing with the immigration system, and continue to talk about how the current system is not only harming disabled people, but also creating disabled people, and just continuing to uplift stories to ensure that there's more visibility within those I mean, out in the community. I think in terms of long term, I would like to see some actual policy being passed that addresses many of the issues that we are talking about. And in particular, I would love to see something to do with the right to access medical equipment. That's a big one for me.
Yeah, this is my so I I guess I'm hoping for the short term that more spaces like this can happen. I mean, there were like what 300 plus people with us today, and that tells me that there's definitely momentum happening here. To continue conversations about disability and immigration and disabled immigrants. So I hope that we can continue what we've started today. But also what I kept hearing as Minnesota was being occupied in the last couple of months here was that we didn't have a plan for like anything. We weren't prepared, and I mean, despite all that, I think we did a really excellent job in our communities. But I think that that to me like doesn't really cut it, because like we could have been prepared or more prepared, right? I mean, in the last 6 years, we've learned a lot of hard lessons from a global pandemic, right? In Minnesota specifically, we're not strangers to civil unrest, right? And so we should have had some things in place specific to people with disabilities, but we didn't. And that's something that we're working on at the ARC Minnesota is, and I know other people have already mentioned it, but, we are really looking to put in place policy, whether that means in statute or just, administrative. We need to like codify some of this stuff, have a emergency plan put in place, and make sure that all the stakeholders who need to be involved in that are included. And so then the next time something happens, because it will happen, we've got like 3 more years of this at least, right? Um, we can just activate, and we'll know how to make sure that our immigrant and disabled communities, we will know how to reach out to them. We'll know how to support them and provide them with the things that they need. And so I feel like, this is really, there are so many lessons that have been learned out of all of this. And so going forward, there should not be any reason at all for us to not be prepared in the future. But I am so thankful for the momentum that we've been building, and with this space that was created today for all of us, and just really hope that in the short run we can continue these conversations so that in the long run we will have a better sense of what direction we need to go.
Thank you very much, Mia, Michelle, Richard, Paula. We are going to shift to the audience Q&A section right now, and to all of our attendees, please keep using the Q&A feature. I will group questions and direct them to specific panelists or make them open. And due to time, we may have to answer all of your questions in a debrief email. So the first one that I am going to ask our panelists is, what should disabled immigrants, TPS holders, and mixed status families know about healthcare coverage and benefits right now? And what advocacy is most urgent around Medicaid, Medicare, and other programs? Who wants to answer this question?
This is Michelle. I was just responding to the same question to a person in the chat. So I was responding to them saying that for non citizens, not everyone qualifies for Medicaid. Like only some qualify. For example, if you're a legal permanent resident, you would qualify for Medicaid. And some visa holders might qualify for Medicaid, and refugees and asylums as well. So, and the undocumented individuals qualify only for emergency Medicaid. So, and so that said, and we talked about CPS holders can qualify for Medicaid. And then we talked about mixed status families. And they can also, only the person who is eligible for Medicaid um, in the household can qualify for Medicaid. Because you know the program that helps folks in home, like home care, again, that is based on the state funded program. So if they get Medicaid, the person that would qualify for Medicaid can get service. Again, like undocumented immigrants would not be able to qualify. So it's very dependent on what kind of status you have. I hope that responded to the question. Anybody else wants to add anything, feel free to do so.
Yes, Michelle, and also there's a lot of advocacy opportunities that people can join. I know Access Living also has a lot of advocacy around this topic in particular. I'm going to select another question from the panel, from the audience. And the next question is, how do we support undocumented people with severe IDD, especially when they have no family here or when systems refuse intervention due to immigration status? So this is specifically for people with IDD. Paula.
This is Paula. These are very difficult questions that y'all are bringing to us panelists, but I'll share that in California, we do have a regional center system that's designed to coordinate service delivery for individuals with IDD. IDD means intellectual and developmental disabilities. In the regional center system in California, immigration status is not a criteria to be eligible for that system, for that support. So that would be one of the resources I would recommend someone who needs support, right? Interventions. If a generic resource is not available to give them the services that they need, the regional center would step in and find a provider or service. Another thing to consider is like other programs, like for example, if it's a child, if it's a minor, or if it's someone enrolled in the school district, approaching them for support and for interventions. Just because someone isn't a citizen means like they might have another type of status. They might be eligible for a different type of program. So it's something to explore. I would have them contact their disability rights organization to help like digest, like what might be available for them. And I also wanted to share that there has been different like attacks on like disability services. For example, in California, they wanted to make cuts to in-home support services and exclude immigrants from the program. The community like got together, opposed like those budget cuts from the states, and we were to oppose that cut. So just things like that. But yeah, so my answer was more clear, was more based on California, but you can also check with your state what laws protect people with IDD and see how they can apply.
Even if it only applies to California, I think one of the main things that makes this panel very valuable is that we all come from different states, so we all bring different perspectives and can share best practices. So it's very valuable. So there's another question is how do we make the less visible harms of immigration enforcement, like benefit cuts and unaffordable healthcare, more visible and build coalition to protect public resources? So how do we focus on this public attention in the most brutal cases, which are very, very important, but also visibilize the other aspects, like benefit cuts and non-affordable healthcare? This question is open for any of our panelists. I'm not sure if you were going to say something, Michelle, or
I was
maybe, yeah.
wasn't sure if anybody was gonna if anybody was gonna answer. So I'm sorry, I was responding to a question in the chat. ¿Me puedes repetir? Okay, can you repeat the
Of course,
question?
of course. The question is, and I think Mike can pop in and answer this question as well, is how do we make the less visible harms of immigration enforcement, like benefit cuts and unaffordable healthcare, more visible and build coalitions to protect public resources? Michelle, do we pass it to Mai and then Mia?
Sure, if you want to answer, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Mai. So I guess I would start off by saying that, you know, the needs of the disability community, and more specifically, disabled immigrants, have been invisible for like ever, right? And so I think that, you know, as a symptom of what's been happening, our issues are being risen up to the surface, which is, you know, really great. And so like we have to take advantage of this moment to really just continue, you know, putting a spotlight on what you know, of the urgency of this, of what the needs are, right? And so I think, you know, just knowing that, like going in, I think is um, it would influence how we, you know, have these conversations, because I don't think people often equate disability and you know, being an immigrant as something that is intersectional, and it truly is. So I think, you know, for many conversations we might be starting with a clean slate, but then for many conversations, you know, we can build off of what we've already started, right? But I think you know, in specifically to what's happening with the funding cuts. And I don't know if this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. You know, in Minnesota, we are under attack right now because of all the fraud stuff that's happening, and folks with disabilities are, you know, I mean, it's devastating. And so I think that in Minnesota, it's a kind of a unique situation where all folks with disabilities and other folks who use Medicaid are being impacted here. And so I think, you know, we have to continue to amplify that. And, you know, we have to also make sure that things are not just accessible in the way we share information, but also culturally and linguistically appropriate, right, for our disabled immigrant communities. And so, you know, at the ARC Minnesota, we prioritize working with our immigrant communities and our BIPOC communities all the time. And I think that, you know, knowing that our cultural communities, our immigrant communities, you know, have historically different um, narratives and, you know, histories than our white disabled folks. We have to keep that in mind as well, right? Because we can't just share information and, you know, try to activate communities without being sensitive to that fact that, you know, immigrant communities are coming from all different kinds of places, and that we need to meet them where they are, while we're trying to lift up visibility to what's happening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mia.
Yeah, this is a very complicated subject just due to the current the current political spot that we are in. I think folks who are working on these types of issues will likely have better success in the state area than they would in the federal level. But I think a lot of times it's really trying to humanize disabled immigrants. A lot of times for political expediency, folks who do not want to provide services and supports to immigrants, whether they're disabled or not, like to villainize or make individuals seem like inanimate objects, etc. So I think it's really trying to humanize the stories that people experience and why it's important to provide these services, not just for the families, but for how it impacts the general community as well. And so that would be more of a public health kind of stance. So you can utilize that as a way to help pressure for providing access to certain services. There is a bit of a unfortunate side effect right now where the current federal administration is threatening to cut off funding for states that do provide these services to individuals who aren't documented. And so I know a lot of states are looking at that and trying to decide if they need to do a lawsuit around that. But I think it's, you know, trying to talk about the impacts that these individuals face, talk about mixed document families and how they need access to services and supports, and going at it in a way that talks about community care. I think is probably going to be the best way to go about pressuring our politicians to provide these services and supports to these individuals. And just a reminder is that many of these individuals pay the same taxes that we pay and don't have access to the services that we do. So I think that can be a bit persuasive as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mia, Mai, Michelle, for this last reflection. And I want to thank our panelists today for sharing their time and their valuable perspectives. And also I want to thank all the people who connected and joined us today in this conversation. We will close with one final update from Access Living, and I will pass it to Michelle.
Yes, thank you, Claudia. So I want to let you know about ongoing immigration work that we're doing. We are working on an immigration and disability watch project. We'll send the information with all of the recording and everything that we're talking about today. It will be sent in the email. This immigration watch project highlights the harms of federal immigration enforcement on disabled immigrants and their families. So very unique to our community. But as we've been talking throughout today's webinar, of all of the harm that we've seen in our community. And also, we want to know from you, our audience, or fellow panelists, if you have any ideas for future webinar in this series. So if you did not know this yet, this is a series of webinars that we're trying to do from, stemming from this. We know that immigration and disability is, this is the first time historically that we kind of like shed the first time in a long time. We've done it before, but that we are shedding the light on the huge issues that are happening. As we've been saying, as all of us have been saying. So we have a very key opportunity here to continue to shed the light of the importance of community. So do you have any ideas for a webinar series or any interested in participating of any conversations that you want to have? Please feel free to contact Chris Ramos at C Ramos. Someone put it in the chat, please. C Ramos at accessliving.org, or you can contact me at mgarcia at accessliving.org. And so I think that would be the final for today. Thank you everyone for accompanying us. Claudia, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I just want to thank everyone again and let everyone know that this webinar has been recorded and we will share the recording and resources after the event. Michelle's contact information and Chris's will also be there in case you need to reach us. Thank you very much to our panelists, our interpreters, and to Alianza Americas for supporting the Spanish translation. And on behalf of Disability Rights California, the ARC Minnesota, and Access Living of Metropolitan Chicago, and the Disability and Immigration Task Force of Illinois, we want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you very much, everyone.